Mech pilots, online. BattleTech manuals, online. Long-term memory, offline. All systems bungled. Initiating BungleTech podcast.
In our 21st deployment of BungleTech, my spheroid co-host Michael and I take a detour from our regular variety format as we share some big news in our Extraordinary Proclamation segment, and then deep dive the creation process we just leveraged when designing our logo's Mech, the Butcher. Please, dear listener, patiently stand a safe distance beside us as we intentionally throw a wrench into our very own Mech's creation engine.
This is Professor Michael presenting The Sphere We Live In. Commonly known as the Bungler by both pilots and mech techs alike, the first model was plagued with manufacturing and design issues. The long, fraught development process led to an expensive mech with numerous shortcomings and few advantages. It was miraculous the mech ever reached the battlefield, but perhaps it would have been better for everyone if it had not. Later iterations resolved the most severe issues, but could never shake the Bungler's reputation. Now you know about the sphere we live in.
Bonus objective. Extraordinary Proclamation. Initiating.
Before we get into the mechanical grid of today's episode, I want to share a few exciting updates with you, our honorable listeners. We've officially retired our BattleTech public podcast content OneNote resource that contained all our game modes. The resource was an experiment in collaboration that didn't reach the objective we were hoping for. So we were moving on to other things, just like Clan Wolverine was forcefully moved on from existence. And that other glorious thing is our BungleTech Game Mode Collection PDF, which is linked in our episode description. We spent a lot of time over the past month building out a comprehensive document that contains all our game modes, hidden objectives, and game mode modifiers. And if we do say so ourselves, it is a beautiful piece of work. Consider it your one-stop shop for all things BungleTech. Check it out for yourself, and keep an electronic version handy the next time you put our game modes onto the table. Also, it includes 100% legit pro tips that you can take to the Comstar Bank. Going forward, when there are version updates of this document, we will update you here on the podcast. As another side, over the last month we've gotten some additional work done for our logo mech. We worked with Tide Chief originally to create a pixel abstraction of our logo mech, and then Plog to create a more realistic version to be used on the mech's record sheet. The new artwork is honestly both insanely good and hilarious, with both artists truly embracing the concept of the mech. In our episode today, we will be discussing the art a bit. If you want to check it out and follow along during our conversation, you can find a link to the artworks posted publicly on our Patreon, linked in our show description. And now, a quick word from our con to welcome a few new members to the clan.
Glory befalls us all, clan fellows. For today, we welcome technician Michael Shelley and MechWarrior Malathis into the warm embrace of our clan. Michael, you've traveled across seas of stars to reach us here with impeccable timing. The revealing of our own totem mech. I welcome you with a firm heart and a fistful of glorious emergency repair overtime. Get to work. And you MechWarrior Malathis, we have bled on the battlefield together. I recall now when we came down together on that Lance of Atlases, you in your Nova, and myself in a Vapor Eagle. The inner sphere Surats stood no chance. My apologies apologies. Our all-knowing and insistent Loremasters MagnumDanger and RetroLazer have just reminded me that it was actually a single awesome, and I was stuck in hot mud at the time in which you fell it. But what of it, I say? It was a glorious victory. To you, Michael, and to you, Malathis. Welcome to the clan.
Welcome back to Who Bungled the Bungler, presented by Your Sphere Today. Even as the project struggled, company leadership seemed oblivious to the challenges facing its engineers.
There's just no way. No. Absolutely not. Listen, I know rotary autocannons are badass, but no, at this point, the mech would be 20% autocannon by weight. Listen, it won't. We can't. No, even if we removed the elbow, there'd be no room for the feed. Yes, I know, I understand. Of course. I know he's an important investor, but... Alright, we'll get the servos pulled tomorrow. Yeah, and what do you want me to do with the laser?
Leaked recordings show an overstretched design team and project managers unwilling to listen to their experts.
Primary objective, podcast topic segment, initiating.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 21 of BungleTech, a BattleTech podcast. Oh my goodness. I know I always say I'm stoked, but I'm really again stoked. Oh, there's just so much fun stuff to do in this universe. I'm so excited to talk about what Michael and I were up to this month. And of course, to talk with Michael about what we were up to this month, Michael needs to be here. Are you here, Michael? Knock, knock.
Knock, knock. Mike, wait, no, I need to knock, knock. I knock, knock.
Who's there?
Michael!
Michael who?
Michael!
Thought you were going to say sensual, Michael. I thought you were going to finally embrace it.
That's your thing that has somehow become my thing.
Yes. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for being here today and listening to this podcast. Michael and I did something super exciting. We finally took time to design our mech, the Bungler. If you notice on our podcast logo, we have a logo of a mech, and that is the mech that we have deemed the Bungler since its inception. However, we had yet to spend the time to actually think about it and design it. And to be 100% honest, I've actually never designed a mech in BattleTech. It's never been something that really has intrigued me. But it was time to do it. So Michael and I committed to the cause, made the time, and learned some fun stuff. Didn't we, Michael?
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting journey. And you made it much more interesting. I do think I understand the rules better now, but it was a painful path to get here.
First, I had so much fun doing this. Oh, it was just such a fun process designing this mech. And Michael, I know you were suffering through many parts of it. I realize that my truest form of happiness is when I'm suffering through something with you. So thank you for just suffering along with a smile. That is joy for me. Collaborative suffering.
Around 7 hours deep, I was getting the real, mech tech experience of oh God, what do you want now? So, it was, I don't know if it was fun, but it was satisfying at the end of it.
All right, everybody. So here's what we did. We did things a little bit different than the standard rules. So first, when you design a mech in BattleTech, as Michael and I both found out, and I was very surprised about this, you use only the tech manual. And this essentially is, the tech manual documents the process. And surprisingly enough, there are no rules when doing this. designing a mech is a purely academic process. You just follow the rules and write it out and do the calculations, and the mech is designed.
I sort of get this because, BattleTech's mostly a game of playing with the mechs, receiving packs of technical readouts that tell you about all the different mechs. And so attaching roles and stuff to that, not necessarily part of BattleTech, but probably Nathan and I were both a bit surprised because coming from like a role-playing background, there's tons of those like crunchy old like 70s, 80s, 90s RPGs that would have like rules up the wazoo. I have fond memories of building complete tanks in various editions of Traveler. I guess maybe I sort of thought there'd be something like that in BattleTech, but it's not really the focus.
Yeah, and I think also my experience with campaign operations or strategic operations in which the rules used to be embedded, I'm used to actual maintenance and repairs and customization rules of mech. So I just assumed that these roles actually would be as part of the actual initial mech design process as well. So the fact that it's a completely separate thing really surprised us. But Michael and I wanted to really throw these random elements in the mix. So what we did is we combined two things and then made something up of our own.
Don't forget the making up. That's a core part of the BungleTech experience.
Yes, it definitely is. So we use the tech manual as, the basic rules for designing a mech, and we abided by that. But we actually created roles using the customization process in campaign operations. So we imagined that we were designing the mech as a custom mech, if that sort of makes sense. And generally, customization is you have a pre-built mech and you're swapping things in and out. I think that we may have made it a little bit harder on ourselves in designing from the beginning, but things worked out in a way that were really, I think, organic and really simulated the chaos that would come into effect as, you're installing armor or you're swapping out different weapons as priorities change in the design process. And because Michael and I have both had the pleasure and the pain of working in environments in which there are projects always going on, and these projects have requirements in them, and software is being developed, and all of a sudden things change, things are reprioritized, and it's such a mess. We wanted to really have this random element come into the process. So we wanted to have a rule set that could simulate a real project being mismanaged.
Nathan's really overselling the whole we thing here. I feel like a lot of this was mostly Nathan's brainchild of he didn't suffer enough in his day job and therefore needed to bring it into our games.
But you suffered through me.
I do suffer through you. You also brought the suffering to me.
Okay, so here's what we did. Long story short, I already mentioned we have the tech manual, which is the basic rules. Then we developed the customization process and used all the roles in there, imagining that all our roles in the design had to leverage the customization process. And then to determine how we were building the mech and what was going to the mech, we built requirements. So we started by agreeing on high-level requirements. And then we also developed some hidden requirements, as in showcasing, that there's different personalities in play that are trying to influence the design. We then gathered stakeholder requirements from our patrons, and we developed art requirements based on the artwork that we had already designed. As part of the process, when we were going through these requirements, we first built the mech based on the core requirements, and then we randomly rolled for the list of the additional 24 requirements, and we then roll a d6 which would determine what we did. If we got a 1 on that d6, it meant that the requirement just wasn't a good fit for the project, so we were throwing it out. If we got a 2 or a 3, it meant that that requirement was going to be postponed for a later phase. It wasn't a good time to address it on the mech now. If we got a 4 and a 5, it meant, this is a requirement we should capture for sure. if it's possible without interfering with the core elements of the mech. And then if we got a 6, it meant that this is a new project priority, and this can overwrite old project priorities. It doesn't matter. We have to make this happen. And we went through this process for all 24, and we are going to walk you through that process because we detailed it step by step. And oh my God, this is the suffering and the joy that I'm speaking of, people. It was so, so cool.
And listeners, you may think to yourself, some of those things don't make any sense. Why would you do it that way? We know. And no, we don't have any better answers.
Let's start with reviewing the requirements that we had for the project. So, Michael, what were our project's core requirements?
Well, in the order that they were added, we set out to build a medium mech, because that's an underrepresented area. We're both fond of medium mechs. We like the lighter stuff, but, medium mechs still have enough room to do some stuff. But we knew that this couldn't just be any medium mech. It needed to be fast, specifically faster than a Centurion. Not a particularly high bar, but we knew we're not overachievers here. We're aiming firmly in the midfield here. We wanted it to have a mixed armament because you want to have the strengths of all of the different weapon types. And we wanted to have all of our essential systems, the things like life support and gyros that make mechs work. We felt it was important to include all of those pieces. Then getting into sort of the more interesting stuff, we wanted it to be a command mech because we realized there was a niche that is unfilled, which is medium-sized command mechs. Usually your command mechs are your heavies or your assaults in particular. But hey, what if you don't have that many tons? You need a command medium mech. We also realized that this mech should be effective at all ranges. This is a common weakness that mech designers put in their mechs where they're only really good at one range. We think you should be great at all ranges, including melee. We also wanted it to be a sturdy mech. We also set it to be more or less sturdier than a Centurion, or at least as sturdy as a Centurion. I don't know why we were measuring against a Centurion the whole time, but that was sort of our touchstone for a similar mech. And then we also set ourselves the goal of making it more flexible than an Omni mech, which is difficult to quantify, but also difficult to achieve for a non-Omni mech. Those are what we agreed upon. The two of us both agreed these would be the core design principles of the mech. And we kept these in our hearts through the entire rest of the process.
And remember to keep in mind, too, people, that because this process was made to reflect requirement mismanagement, normally requirements would be a little bit better defined than this, but the more open-ended we keep them in projects, it just creates more chaos. So this was perfect to give us the freedom and also allow us to interpret them and be adaptive.
Yeah, the open-ended requirements gave us OmniMech-like flexibility while building.
There you go. That's how we hit that one. Woo! All right. Before we go into deeper requirements, when we actually ended up designing the mech, Michael and I were sitting, we were having coffee, it's a cool little cafe, and we were thinking like, okay, how can we also throw some more random elements in the mix? And then we got a fortune cookie at the table. And I was like, Michael, let's incorporate the fortune cookie into our mech design. Whatever our fortune cookie reads, we have to somehow make that relevant into how we design the mech. And the fortune cookie said, a job well begun is half done. Okay, how can we interpret that? And we discussed it a bit and we decided, all right, rather than do any roles for the core requirements, we are just going to build the mech based on its core requirements following the tech manual process with no roles first. And that is our prototype that we're bringing to the stakeholders before the other random requirements start getting thrown in and mess up the mix.
At this point, we were basically building the best mech we could, given our limited knowledge of how to actually build mechs.
Yes.
But we were trying to do a good job. We really tried.
We'll share some record sheets. So we'll share this record sheet as well, which is essentially the skeleton version. Like this is the version, once again, that, we brought to the clients and we're like, oh, look at this. It could be this. And then all that random requirement mess started coming in.
And I will say, I think this version of the mech really had like 16-year-old built your first mech sort of energy, where it had a bit of the like, well, of course I'm going to use clan weapons because they're better. Well, why are the clan heat sinks better than inner sphere heat sinks? Of course I'm going to use the clan heat sinks. So it's got a bit of like that energy to me. My first mech.png energy.
All right, well, let's talk about our other requirements. Next, we developed our hidden requirements. This was 4 requirements that I developed and Michael developed that we didn't share when we were developing them. And then we just put them in a pool together. So I'll share my 4 first. I decided that the mech had to have chaff pods for defense. It had to be effective at connecting to satellites to enhance its command capabilities. It had to have a long-range energy weapon. And it needed to have mask or supercharger. Michael, what were your 4 requirements?
All right. Well, the first one is, looking historically, obviously, sloped armor has been found to be extremely effective in armored vehicles. So obviously it was essential for our Bungler to have properly sloped armor. Essentially, this meant narrow, low profile because I love that quirk, but technically just wanted sloped armor of some description. I don't even care which way it's sloped. The next thing was that obviously we want to use the most advanced weaponry because they wouldn't have made new weapons if they weren't better than the old weapons. So I wanted to see like re-engineered lasers. I want to see quirky guns and weird munition types. Anything advanced. The next one was something that's very, very personal to me, or more specifically to our dear colleague, Professor Michael, which was this mech must be properly Kodama resistant. There are actually no existing mechs which are rated for functioning in jungles populated by Kodamas, and that is a serious risk. No one understands the dangers that they pose, so this should be the first properly Kodama-resistant mech.
What's a Kodama?
There's some small 6-legged marsupials. They come from the world of isekai, and they are normally quite peaceful. They graze, but they're part of like really big family units of like hundreds or thousands of them, and they have this unique quirk of being extremely violent, where harming any one of the clan will result in a terrifying frenzy of hundreds or thousands of Kodamas tearing you apart, tearing anything around you apart, getting into your mech and eating the internals, you name it. They're possibly the most dangerous organism in the known galaxy, actually.
Is there going to be some lore that you build up of Professor Michael that his family fell victim to Kodamas, perhaps, and that's why it means so much to him?
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how things unfold. And then the last requirement, I think this one, Nathan was talking about how some of them are too open-ended. This one, however, nice, to the point, direct, clear, and achievable. This mech, the Bungler, needs to strike fear into the hearts of its enemies. Obviously. I think we all know what that means. Nothing else to say. Back to you, Nathan.
Oh man, just like a Kodama strikes fear into the hearts of everyone. All right, next, we went to our Patreons to get stakeholder requirements. From MechWarrior Malathis, we got rotary autocannons. He wanted there to be rotary autocannons on the mech. From Loremaster MagnumDanger, we got a snub-nosed PPC. He also said he wanted some sort of design quirk with it, which, funnily enough, came about in the process, as you will find out. MagnumDanger also mentioned he wanted there to be TSM. Technician Klint mentioned he wanted there to be MML, multi-missile launchers, with 3 tons of MML ammunition. I split those into 2 separate requirements because that's how requirements get mismanaged. Technician Matthew Hopper requested offset jump jets so we could be an agile jumper in weird ways. And we also got one more from MagnumDanger, which was underwater maneuvering units. Well, oh boy, thank you for that one. And my favorite one, perhaps, was from MechWarrior Metal Ed, and I'm just going to read it because it's so well written, I can't paraphrase it. On behalf of our parent Capellan Confederation-based corporation, I would like to give a gentle reminder that our purchase order of the Bungler requires it to have the capability of clearing forests and or abandoned, definitely unoccupied structures via the application of heat. We've many dissenting branches and abandoned housing structures which require clearing. Flamers, plasmas, or infernos. Any heat source will do. Throw in infernos or flamers or some sort of heat weapon into the mix. I just love how he wrote that. So thank you for that one. And I love fire. So this is one of my favorite requirements too. So those are the core requirements. Those are Michael and I's individual requirements. Now the stakeholder requirements. And we also added art design requirements. And this one is a little bit interesting. Before we go into this, we have to explain how we actually came about designing the art. So if you're following along with the picture that I shared on our Patreon, you will see, and it's a publicly accessible picture, by the way, so you can just access that link whenever. You'll see we've 3 versions of the Bungler. We have our podcast icon, then we have a version designed by Tie Chief, and a version designed by Plog, which is actually what is on the record sheet. How this came about was a little bit fun. For the first art, the Bungler logo, I literally went to a retro cartoon artist and I said, okay, here's a Jenner, here's a Marauder. I like Jenners, Michael likes Marauders. Let's combine it into some retro cartoony form. And there was some intention regarding doing the retro cartoon design. One being that it's playful, it's comical, but also what's something that retro cartoons always do? What do characters in retro cartoons always do, Michael? What's something that always happens in those old school retro cartoons that use it as a sense of comic relief for surprise and something like that is relevant for our podcast?
I literally have no idea.
They break the rules.
Okay, yeah.
Retro cartoons always break the rules of the universe. They take chalk, they draw something on a wall, then all of a sudden it becomes a real door. Just like us. It's perfect.
I did not know where you were going with that.
There you go. Yeah, I know it's a little bit philosophical. So then we have that original art. I ended up finding Tie Chief's art on, I think Sarna shared an article sharing some of the work. He basically makes pixelized versions of mechs, and oh my God, I want to make a Bungler version of this. So I contacted Tie Chief and I gave him the mission. I gave him essentially the retro art, and I said to him, okay, can you take this art? Can you design it into a standard battle mech sort of format? Knowing that this Bungler is a cartoonized version that has had its features dramatized. So just revisualize this as a real mech and know that it's either a light or a medium and that it shouldn't feel very sleek or well made. Michael and I have always intended to give it the legal design quirk ever since we spontaneously and surprisingly referenced that our favorite design quirk when reviewing them all was the legal design quirk. We're like, what? We're so in sync. So we knew we had to incorporate that somehow. Imagine it was designed by 2 mech enthusiasts who weren't necessarily the best mech techs or project managers. So he created his version. And you know what? I want to share some of the notes he sent me in his email showing his rationale and the choices he made, because honestly, it really made me laugh my ass off. All right, so Tie Chief said that he wanted to make sure the torso felt nice and wide because the torso should feel almost like it's too wide for a lighter medium mech, hinting at that there's something strange going on underneath the hood. Like, the engine, something isn't right. He also decided to incorporate a few irregularities here and there. He wanted to break up the silhouette of the mech and to make the person who looked at it wonder like, why is there a protruding metal block there and there? Why on earth is there an electrical panel on a forward-facing surface? Are those air intake vents facing directly forward? Wouldn't the exhaust on the nose interfere with the MechWarriors' vision and sensors? All these questions. And he wanted to counteract the cartoon version's round, smooth shape in places because that's what a well-made mech might look like. He really wanted to make it feel like it had angled surfaces that don't always look like they quite fit together. For instance, the hip should have some extra pieces between the hip and the upper leg that make people think, why are they there? Are they extra armor? Or did we just decide as the mech designers that it looked neat? Did the designers intend to armor the cockpit from the sides by having it recessed within the torso? Or was it just because those were the parts that they had happened to work with when they were available? And he also decided to make some sensors extra visible. Typically, he mentioned we don't get a good look at sensor packages on mechs, even though we know they are obviously there because they're inside and protected. But he's like, no. If this mech is poorly made, maybe they just decided to keep them outside and exposed. So that was some of his rationale in that design.
Maybe you installed additional comms packages and then removed them and then reinstalled them again and then removed them again.
Oh man, imagine that happening. And then we took that design to Plog, and once again we gave Plog our Tai Chief version and this version. We gave him the same instructions, like this is a mech that is not well designed, sort of a hodgepodge of things. And I really like how Plog took it into a more realistic form. There's different leg parts. There's so many elements of the mech that is mismatched and messy. There's even a little leaky puddle underneath. Like, it is just a beautiful design that screams, this mech has heart, but, maybe it's not the best made design. So really, really happy with that.
You mean like our podcast?
Hey, maybe. It's all a metaphor. Okay, so we had this art, right? And then, we're like, well, we don't want the mech to be completely different from the art, so let's design some art design requirements and chuck those in the mix so we can sort of get more chaos in there and also push it towards that visual design a little bit. So we decided that based on how the art looked, that the mech would have to have flippy arms, or not have to have, that could have flippy arms. It could have an enhanced communication suite. It could have a cowl. It could have an advanced cooling system. It could have a searchlight, protected actuators that nothing could have, a large cockpit, because once again, the split, and an enhanced targeting system, because what the heck are all those weird cables out there unless it's something for targeting or communications? So those are the requirements. So once again, we designed the core prototype that we brought to the stakeholders with those 8 requirements, and now we have 24 more requirements that we are going to throw into the mix and see what happens. Let the adventure begin!
So, like I mentioned, our first take was genuinely like an attempt by us to make a good mech. I don't think it was good by any stretch, but it at least worked fundamentally and met all of those core requirements we originally had. It's a medium mech, 50-tonner, XL engine, ferrolamellar armor because it seemed the hardest, and not a particularly mixed armament, but we had two Streak SRM2s, an ER large laser, and then 3 ER medium lasers, plus a retractable blade for melee combat. It was a functional little 6'9" mech with reasonable armor, reasonable armament, probably overvalued in the BV department, but it was a first attempt. I think it's solid. I don't know that I would pay the BV for it, but if you gave me the mech, I'd definitely pilot it.
It's something I wouldn't mind piloting on the table for sure. It had gusto. So we have that mech, and now we need to determine how to modify it and customize it based on the requirements. So once again, we used the customization rules found in strategic operations. And how that works is you choose a technician team, a level of technician team. We decided that, this project is well funded. We have some lore behind it that will eventually be shared, but we had a single veteran technician team. We assumed that we'd be starting at the highest quality, which is clan quality, which gives a -2 modifier on all rolls. A veteran technician team basically means at a base level, for them to be successful on things, you need to roll a 5 or above roll to be successful. And the clan quality of -2 would make that just a 3 base before any other modifiers to be successful. And then each component that we install has an individual tech rating modifier that ranges from -4 to +2. So we'd go through individual items as we encountered them, apply that tech rating modifier. In terms of the era where we're in, we imagine we are an ill clan, so that in general gives us an era modifier of +0. And then the individual customization type has different difficulties. So rather than imagine that this entire thing was made in a factory, which is probably ideal state, we imagine that for cost-saving potential, we had a facility maintenance setting in which we were doing basic stuff that we could, and then when we needed to go to the factory, we'd cart it over to the factory for a day, do the work, and then pull it back to the facility maintenance setting that we had, okay? For armor, for the installation of most weapons, for adding case or components that take critical slots on multiple locations, or for changing the gyro, weight, or type, we did that in a facility maintenance setting, which gave us a -2 modifier on all rolls, which was counteracted by the difficulty of the item being installed, which was either between a +2 or a +4. When we went to the factory, which gave us a -4 modifier on all rolls, that was for when we were doing bigger things like changing the engine type or cockpit, changing internal structure type, engine, gyro, cockpit. And those modifiers on those are +4 to +5. On top of all of this, if any component was experimental, it added an additional +2 modifier. Anyhow, that's lots of numbers that I'm throwing out there, but I just want to show you that's the process that we're used. And when we actually walk through these individual requirements, I'm going to mention what the target number is and what we got. Also, when you're doing these installations, there's a rule that if your check results in a 2, it results in a negative design quirk, but you still end up installing the thing. It just takes double the time and reduces the quality grading. We decided that we wanted more negative design quirks, so we decided whenever we fail a roll, we get a negative design quirk. And if we get a roll of 2 ever, we get a negative design quirk, which is specifically a non-functional item that we cannot remove. And because we want to be kind to ourselves as well, we said, well, if we're going to be kneecapping ourselves, we should as well be giving ourselves a little boon. So if we ever rolled a 12, we got a positive design quirk. That was the system. So simple, right?
I was mostly along for the ride for this. I was managing those mech techs as we built the thing. Nathan took care of all the can we, won't we, whatever.
All right. Let's go through it step by step. All right. So remember, our process is we have that remaining 24 requirements. We randomly roll a number between 1 to 24. We get that requirement. We then roll a d6 to determine how we treat that requirement, which is either dropped, postponed, prioritized as a nice to have priority, or prioritized as a new mandatory, you have to have this priority. Let's get into it, Michael.
Been a long time coming.
First roll, we roll the requirement to install a mask or a supercharger. We then roll to see how we're going to deal with this requirement. Oh no, it's postponed, we decide.
I mean, the mech's plenty fast already. Does it really need a supercharger?
This is too complicated. Let's handle this later. That's what the roll decides, so we push it aside. Next roll, enhanced targeting system requirement. Oh, we need an enhanced targeting system. Unfortunately, there's some disagreements in the team, and it's further postponed. We decide to postpone it. But we roll it again, coincidentally, and decide that, you know what, actually, guys, we shouldn't have postponed that last requirement. No, it actually should be a nice-to-have requirement. Let's capture it now. What did we do to implement this nice-to-have requirement, Michael?
Well, targeting computers are obviously handy, but we did actually already have an actuator enhancement system that does basically the same thing and is incompatible. So we tore out the actuator enhancement system, removed one of our double heat sinks, and replaced it with the targeting computer plus a bonus half-ton of armor.
And for this, we needed a 5, and we rolled a 5. Easy peasy. Barely. You'll see lots of our rolls are just barely.
starting off great. Margin of success, 0.
Next requirement that came up was to install a large cockpit. After doing the roll, the team decided that this needs to be postponed to a future phase. It's not time to mess with the cockpit yet.
We put a regular-sized cockpit. It's not a small cockpit. It's plenty big.
Next, strike fear into the hearts of enemies. Well, the team looked at this requirement collectively and thought, you know what? Maybe we should wait till the end to apply this. We rolled the d6, and that was another postpone. We postponed this one. But the next one, an underwater maneuvering unit. Ooh, interesting stakeholder requirement, we decided. We rolled. This was to replace a previous nice-to-have requirement. And how did we bring this one to fruition, Michael? What do we have to do?
Well, underwater maneuvering unit. Yeah, that's pretty important. Moving and maneuverability is important, and we set out to be faster than a Centurion, so we want to be faster than a Centurion underwater as well. So this is we dropped one of our Streak SRMs and that half ton of bonus armor we just got, so that we could install 4 underwater maneuvering units in the legs. Plus a bonus double heat sink, or rather, we moved the double heat sink from the legs into the torso.
And for this roll, we needed a 6, and we rolled an 8. So easy peasy. Now we're cruising underwater, man.
Easy peasy, making MX easy. And now we're fast underwater, I guess. You had asked in this one, like, hey, if we put it in the legs, can you use it when you're like half in the water? And the answer is no.
Oh.
Underwater maneuvering units only work if fully submerged.
I guess you gotta go drop to hull down. That's the next rule. If you're hull down in water, can you use them?
Yeah.
I feel like you should be able to.
I mean, I guess so. Just like a shark.
Exactly. Next requirement we drew up was protected actuators, and this was as well postponed to future phase by the team.
Our armor is plenty good already.
Next was offset jump jets. Unfortunately, the team looked at this requirement and we dropped it. We're like, well, we can't have offset jump jets if we have an underwater maneuvering unit. When we rolled, it determined that this requirement would be dropped. Sorry, jump jets. Next requirement, rotary autocannons. The team saw this requirement come up. Oh, straight from the big boss above. This is a new mandatory requirement. This mech needs rotary autocannons. Everything else be damned. What happened here, Michael?
This one was the first point where things got really hard. Because, when we saw the requirement for a rotary autocannon, we're like, obviously needs to be a proper rotary autocannon. That means a Rack 5. We're not installing any pansy Rack 2s. But rotary autocannons are huge and heavy. And this mech already had a problem of having too many things jammed into it. We had to go to town. We replaced the engine with a Clan XL engine. We tore out the large laser, the targeting computer, the remaining Streak SRM2, one of the ER medium lasers, the case, and 1.5 tons of armor, as well as the right lower arm actuator, just to fit the gun in the arm with 1 ton of ammunition.
It was mandatory. It was a new mandatory requirement that got added to the list, so we had to do it, man. We had to make it happen.
We didn't have a choice.
Straight from the top. For this, we needed 2 rolls. We needed a 4 to upgrade to the XL. We rolled a 5. We needed a 6 to install the Rack 5, and we rolled a 4, which equated to a negative design quirk on the Rack 5 that we had prioritized, and a quality drop on the mech, which meant that all future rolls would be more difficult. Wowza. Thanks a lot, rotary autocannon.
It really, that rotary autocannon did not fit in that arm. It had no reason to be in that arm. I'm not surprised there were, probably ammo feed issues.
The next requirement that came up was 3 tons of MML ammunition. And the team looked at that and realized, why are we going to add MML ammunition? There's no MML. This makes no sense. So it was rolled and it was dropped by the team. Oh, unfortunate. After that, the person that was advocating for the large cockpit burst back in the room again. But what about the large cockpit? We rolled and we said, not now, and he was kicked out of the room again.
It's big enough.
It's big enough. Next requirement popped up was enhanced communications suite, and the team determined that this could replace a nice-to-have requirement. So what did we do, Michael, to bring this one to play?
We actually already had additional communications equipment to meet the core requirement of being a command mech. We didn't know exactly what that meant, so we put in a total of 3 tons of communications equipment, which gives you a +1 for initiative for your lance. And that's basically what a command mech is. So when this even more enhanced comm suite requirement came by, we're like, great, if we add an extra 1 ton, then it provides bonuses for satellite connectivity. So we dropped 2 of the underwater maneuvering units, I don't have an excuse for that. We started with 4, so now we have 2. And then we installed 1 ton of comms equipment, bringing us up to 4 tons and a bonus for satellite connections.
Well, after all, the underwater maneuvering units was very clear from the stakeholder that that was just a nice-to-have requirement. We needed a 5 for that, and we rolled an 11.
No problem. We're good at installing comms equipment. We're good with the radio.
Next requirement, we needed a long-range energy system. Oh my goodness, team, we've lost track of the vision. This is a mandatory requirement. This can replace everything. This is coming to the forefront. We had to install a long-range energy system, even though we just removed one 2 steps ago. What did we have to do, Michael? This is another disastrous little moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was unfortunate because we already had an ER large laser, but then had to remove it to fit the Rack 5. And like honestly, as long as that Rack 5 was there, we could not work around it. Like those things are monstrous. So we sort of did our best. We didn't want to completely remove it, so we downgraded the Rack 5 to an Ultra Autocannon 5, which gave us enough room to fit an ER large laser and 1 ton of armor.
Wasn't it Ultra Autocannon 2?
You might be right. That does sound more correct. Yes, I think...
I think we had to. But it's the Spirit. It can still double tap. It's like it's a rotary autocannon.
It kind of rotates. It rotates between one barrel. So that was what we could do. It got us the ER large laser back and then 1 ton of armor because it was starting to look a little bit thin.
Yes. And so we needed 3 rolls for this one to install the UAC-2. We need a 6, we got a 6. ER large laser, we needed a 6, got a 6. To install the new armor, we needed an 8 and got an 8. So everything is hunky-dory, barely still. And, for a note, that negative design quirk of the Rack 5 copied over to the UAC-2. That was because, it's replacing something that had an issue in the installation, so the negative design quirk is still there. Next requirement, the multi-missile launcher. Oh, and you know what? This is actually pretty important, guys. I think this can also overwrite a mandatory requirement. This needs to be prioritized in this mech. Michael, what did we do to install the multi-missile launcher?
This one sort of makes sense because at this point we're no longer effective at all ranges. We're barely effective at any range. So, I'm down with adding the MML. It's a little bit heavy, but we managed to fit it in by dropping our 1 ton of bonus comms equipment, our remaining 2 ER medium lasers. That one stings a little bit, and then a 1/2 ton of armor. And this allowed us to fit in the MML3 plus 1 ton of MML LRM ammo and 1 ton of MML SRM ammo. Because obviously if you're installing an MML, you need to have both of them. We're supposed to be effective at all ranges, so we need short range and long range ammo. So we managed to squeeze that in at the low cost of 2 of the most effective weapons in the game.
And though we're still keeping to, once again, our core requirements, we're still, pretty tough and more effective at other ranges. So I think that there's the things that we had to drop here still kept us true to our core requirement vision, even the additional ones that we got. The roll for this one was a target number of 6, and we got a 7. No problem. Next requirement rolled up, flippy arms. An intern runs into the room. But what about the flippy arms? No! Get out of here! This is not the time to determine flippy arms. It's postponed to future phase. He runs out crying. It was very traumatic. We had to talk to HR about that one after. The next requirement pops up is to have a cowl. And we determine that this can replace a nice-to-have requirement. This one's a little bit interesting because we actually bungled the install of this. But what did we do to install this that we then later, in the final design, retroactively fixed, Michael?
Well, you see, we weren't exactly sure how an armored cowl worked. So we went shopping on Mech eBay and saw a sweet-looking armored cowl item that only weighed 1 ton. And so we're like, hey, I guess that's what we're supposed to buy. So we dropped 1 heatsink. We ordered the armored cowl. But when it arrived, it turns out it was a box full of bricks, and we'd been scammed on the internet. So turns out that didn't actually do anything, and we didn't actually buy a thing, but we dropped a heatsink for it anyways.
Exactly. It turned out the armored cowl that we were actually going to get is a design quirk, not something we actually install. Because of that, we later retroactively went back in and just gave it the design quirk. And I think we gave ourselves more armor. So I forget what we did. This was after the design was finalized. But to do this, we need a success of 6, or a target number of 6, and we got a target number of 6 is what we rolled. So no problem. Next requirement pops up, the best requirement. We need chaff pods for defense. And that was dropped. Wait a minute, we don't need this defense, we have enough defense. Next, advanced cooling system, man, we need advanced cooling system. This would be so great, this would be like new age. No, we don't, it's dropped. We have enough heat sinks, the roll determines drop, that requirement is thrown out. Next requirement, searchlight. Oh, a searchlight. Hey, that's a good idea. That way we can see things in the night.
You gotta be able to see.
That's important. But not that important. This can replace a nice-to-have requirement. What did we do to bring the searchlight in, Michael?
Technically, sinking heat was not a core requirement, so we could just drop another heat sink to add a searchlight and a half ton of armor.
Exactly. For the searchlight, it was actually an auto success because of the difficulty, but we rolled it anyhow to see if we got a negative design quirk, and we got a 3, so no problem. And for the tons of armor install, we needed a target number of 6, and we rolled an 8. So still hunky-dory. Next, narrow low profile. Oh man, wouldn't it be so great if our mech was sleek and had narrow low profile? The team agreed. As a nice-to-have requirement, yeah, this could be good to do. This one is interesting because this is just a design quirk, so rather than actually have to install something, we still gave it a roll based on armor, so we set a target roll of 6, and we ended up rolling 7, and we just said the rule that, okay, this is going to eat up a certain amount of our positive design quirk points inherently, because we know we're going to have lots of negative design quirks coming out of that, so we just committed to that. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. Next requirement pops up. Fire. We need to have some way to produce fire, plasma, infernos to help our Capellan Confederation buddies clear those abandoned housing units effectively. And this was a core requirement. This is prioritized.
But it was also easy. We just took out the SRM ammo and put Inferno ammo. Who needs regular rockets?
Once again, easy, automatic roll success, but we rolled for it anyhow, got a 7, no problem. The intern walks back into the room, this time with an HR rep beside him, and he says, actually, I have the right to request flippy arms. Okay, fine. Since HR is here, I guess we'll go ahead with it. It's a nice-to-have requirement. What do we do to make this happen, Michael?
Well, we just sort of accepted that, flexibility's nice. Unfortunately, we could not have flippy arms while keeping the retractable blade, and we really couldn't drop the retractable blade. We needed to be effective in melee. So we compromised, and we just removed the left lower arm actuator so that a couple of the weapons were on a flippy arm, and one of the arms is not a flippy arm. I don't know how legal that is, but it's what we did.
The UAC2, man. That's going to be the one flippy arm flipping around backwards. That's effective, and that's really good at long ranges. So you can actually snipe with his back turned. That's pretty impressive. The target roll was automatic, but we rolled for it anyhow, and we got a 6. Next requirement, masker supercharger. We need to do this. Team decides, no, this actually isn't a good time for that. Next requirement, actually, it is a good time for it, and it can replace a nice-to-have requirement. So what do we do to install the masker supercharger?
We talked it out. We settled on a supercharger probably being the better option. At this point, we finally removed the last of the underwater movement unit, decided that the UMU just wasn't fitting the current vision for the mech. So we pulled that out and dropped in a supercharger.
Yeah, we need to be faster than a Centurion. We couldn't really remove any armor. Our heat was getting dicey. Most of the weapons were priority requirements. We were sort of locked in. We did what we had to do. We needed a 6, we rolled a 6. Look at this, we're always hitting the target number, man. We should have had a bonus rule for hitting the target number. Anyhow, next requirement. This is where it got funny to me. Strike fear into the hearts of enemies. Our team looked at the person who pulled this requirement in. The designer, Professor Michael, looked him in the eyes, looked back at the mech schematic, looked back at Professor Michael, and said, "I'm sorry, sir. This isn't going to be possible anymore." And it was discarded. There's no way this is going to make people afraid anymore. It's gone too far. That one was discarded. How did that feel, Michael, coming from one of your most passionate requirements that you as one of the core project leads of this project put forward?
Honestly, this was probably third on importance of my requirements. We already got angled armor, which is great. Angled armor is good. That's as far as I know about designing armored vehicles. And my number one priority is still yet to come.
The number one. Oh, that's my favorite one too, actually. Next one we roll is TSM. Gotta install TSM. Turns out the teams looks at it. Oh my God, guys, you know how many changes we have in this mech? We clearly can't do this. That requirement is discarded based on the roll. Next requirement, effective at connecting to satellites to enhance command capabilities. And guess what, guys? This is a mandatory requirement. We gotta make sure that we can connect to satellites. What do we do, Michael?
Well, this is the return of a long lost requirement. So we put those communications equipment back in. We drop a heat sink and we put a ton of comms equipment back again.
Again, just accept. It's gonna get spicy. Now you understand why all those cables are sticking out of the mech, everybody. This just kept on happening. We needed a 6 for this. We rolled a 9. No problem. Next requirement pops up. Large cockpit. We need a large cockpit. The team screams at this person, "No! Get out of here. There's too many changes." The requirement is discarded. Next requirement pops up. Most advanced weaponry available to it. Re-engineered lasers or something of an equivalent. And guess what, everybody? It's a mandatory requirement. We've lost sight of the vision. This thing has to be the best of the best new age fancy dancy mech.
Weapon seller, we need your strongest weapon. What's it gonna be?
Your most advanced weapon.
We need your advancedest weapon.
What could we do to make this happen with our limited constraints and all the conflicting requirements already?
It turns out it was actually pretty hard. We really compromised for the sake of, well, you'll see. So we dropped our speed down by 1. This let us install a much smaller engine and save a bunch of tonnage. So we dropped its speed down to make it a 5.8. We dropped the searchlight as well as a half ton of armor. And with that, we were able to install 2 small variable speed pulse lasers. The most advanced lasers out there.
Yep.
As far as I'm concerned.
And we could drop the speed by 1 now, because technically with the supercharger, we were still faster than our base Centurion requirement. So we're still hitting our core requirements by doing this drop.
Technically.
There's lots of technicalities in this design. After all, it is a technical process. There you go. So the target number to change the engine was 5. We rolled an 8, no problem. And the target number to install each variable speed pulse laser was an 8. We rolled a 7 for one and a 12 for the other, meaning one has a negative design quirk and the other has a positive design quirk. Uh-oh. And obviously, the quality of our mech now drops, so now future rolls are going to be more challenging. Next requirement pops up, snub-nose PPC. We need a snub-nose PPC, but it's not a super priority. It can replace a nice-to-have requirement. Luckily, I think this was pretty easy, right, Michael? What'd we do?
We still had an ER large laser at this point functioning as our long-range energy weapon. And, PPCs are long-range. Snub-nose PPCs are kind of long-range. And they're pretty advanced. So we dropped the ER large laser. We dropped our defective small VSP laser and replaced that with a nice little compact snub-nosed PPC.
Which inherits the negative design quirk, unfortunately, because all the wires are crisscrossed in there. Stop removing and installing things in the mech. Nothing makes sense.
Turns out the problems that it already had didn't get better by replacing it with a much bigger weapon.
The target number was 7, and we rolled at 8, so everything is hunky-dory. Next, a man dripping sweat, face covered in tears, obviously traumatized, breaks into the room. We all recognize him immediately as the star, Professor Michael, who says, "The mech must be Kodama resistant. Please, as a nice-to-have request, do it for those that have fallen victim."
I just think that it would really improve the saleability in the Isekanian markets.
And when Professor Michael makes a suggestion, even if it is a nice-to-have requirement, you make sure it happens, people.
This whole time we'd been really fighting to keep an armored gyro. There was another stakeholder who was just really keen on an armored gyro for some reason, despite it not really being a requirement. This was the point where we finally took that extra armor off and added it back on as 1 ton of regular armor, figuring by the time you have Kodamas eating your gyro, you're already pooped. So you need the extra armor to keep them out in the first place. Then, on top of that, to help make sure that you have the best chance of survival, we stuck an A-pod on each leg. So that when those Kodamas get close, you wait until the pack is at maximum density, and then you let them rip shredded Kodamas everywhere.
Yeah. That is, now we just need like a personnel equivalent of that. Throw them in the middle of the Kodama pack. Trigger it. Pow. To install the A-pod, the difficulty was 4 each. We rolled a 4 and a 5, so both were successful. To install the new armor, the target number was 9. Once again, things are going downhill because of the quality. It's a difficult armor to install. And we rolled a 3, meaning there's a negative design quirk somewhere on the armor of the mech. And then, as a last desperate ditch effort, a man steps in the room and says, "What about the protected actuators?" Everyone in the project team looks at him, fatigue in their face, tears, looking at the beautiful mech that has been torn to tatters by this horribly mismanaged process. We can't go on anymore, and it's discarded. And that is all the 24 requirements addressed, while maintaining the core requirements of the mech in some form. Oh my God, what a process. And that record sheet is shared for you on the podcast. So you'll see we'll have a link to that, and you can check it out if you want to see what this record sheet is all about.
Hoo boy, it's really a mech. 1253 battle value, 5'8", 50-tonner, 9.5 tons of ferrolamellar armor, XL engines, absolutely top-of-the-line armaments. You got your Ultra AC-2, you've got your MML shooting LRM ammo or Inferno short-range ammo, got a supercharger, a retractable blade, a small VSP laser, and a snub-nosed PPC, plus 2 A-pods. Like, you are decked for dealing with extremely light resistance. And that's about it.
Perhaps the perfect mech design to combat Kodamas. Finally, a mech specialized, designed to fight Kodamas. And as we mentioned, there's some design quirks we had to give, right? So we went through and we assigned the design quirks for the UAC-2. We gave it ammo feed problems.
That ammo's probably routed through the legs. I don't even know.
Pulling it in, putting it out. There's something bad going on. The snub-nosed PPC, obviously, it replaced the malfunctioning VSP, but it wasn't that. It was the wires in there, man. They're all crisscrossed. It has EM interference, which is pretty bad. After you fire the mech, you basically, the communications equipment bonus you get for the next round is completely disabled. So don't fire your snub-nosed PPC.
Well, you know, we fit that PPC into the space previously occupied by a small laser. So, you know, we had to take off some of the shielding to fit it in there.
But don't worry, it's not all bad. We have the VSP, the variable speed pulse laser, and it has a positive quirk. It's an accurate weapon.
Heck yeah.
Yay!
Best thing about the mech, that one accurate small laser.
Unfortunately, due to the complications of the armor, the mech does have difficult ejection, putting the cowl, bending everything around, all those changes. Things just don't work right anymore on ejection. You're going to take an extra pilot hit if you try to get out of there. And then, of course, because of the strange vision of the creators, the mech has an illegal design quirk because its engine is stored in unusual ways, meaning that every 6 rounds you have to roll 2d6, and if you roll 6 or above, something very bad happens to the mech. As once again, we started this saying it would definitely have the legal design quirk. And the dream positive quirk that we came out with this is a narrow low profile.
Heck yeah.
That we somehow managed to squeeze through.
Heck yeah. Narrow low profile, baby.
In short, 4 positive design quirk points were spent and 3 negative design quirk points were spent. The book makes a suggestion to balance it out. We decided not to do that because it is illegal design. It's going to blow up anyhow. And honestly, look at this mech. Look what the requirements did. Look at its horror.
Look at its beauty. Gaze upon it and despair.
It's a mess. There is this record sheet. We're going to share once again, the prototype. We'll share the version that was first released. So the Bungler 1. But eventually, the team got back together and decided to actually make a better mech. So we will release a Bungler 2 as well, which is a more playable version of this mech that is more aligned to the original prototype designs, that makes more intelligent decisions, in case you decide to put this mech on the table. And because this has been a collaborative process, to name this mech, we're actually going to do a poll on our Patreon as well. And our patrons are going to be able to influence how it will be named. So we have a few different name concepts because honestly, guys, when you go to name a mech, you're not going to build a mech calling it the Bungler, right? They had a better name before its horrible performance on the battlefield got it nicknamed the Bungler. So this is something that's going to be on our Patreon. So if you're interested in contributing to that, you can easily just go onto our Patreon and vote for that. We'll announce what name we're landing on by next episode. Huzzah!
Huzzah!
Oh,
It is built.
it is built.
We did it. We built a mech. I got to admit, somewhere around hour 7 of this process, I was unsure we were capable of building a mech, but we did it. Kind of.
I'm actually surprised by the process, how well it actually worked out in terms of fulfilling all the requirements and the new core requirements. I thought there'd be lots of moments where we'd hit a wall. And only the really big one was having to downgrade the Rack 5 to a UAC 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was the one thing where if we kept the Rack 5, we couldn't have a new energy system, and that sort of conflicted with more requirements. So we had to sacrifice on a core requirement. But other than that, I think all the core requirements were still met with lots of little things messing it up, but it just mashed together in a way where this mech is, oh my goodness. You don't want to pilot this mech.
It would be bad for your health, bad for your pilot, bad for you trying to understand the rules. We have so many things that are just going to be an absolute pain in the butt to play on the table. But, that's Bungler spirit.
Totally. And don't you worry, we're going to force you to play with it anyhow, because we will design a game mode specifically with this mech, where this mech will have to be used. We're brainstorming it right now, and when we design that, we will put it in our BattleTech game mode collection, which I referenced in the Extraordinary Proclamation segment. Also, in case you wanted to actually use this requirements gathering process that we use, once again, it supplements the tech manual process and the customization process. Those rules are what exist in the books. We have included that in our game mode modifiers. So it'll explain the breakdown, how you develop the requirements, what the rules are, and all that stuff in case you want to incorporate this as well. And honestly, it was a very, very fun process, because if you've ever been in a project like this, it gets messy. If you have someone mismanaging requirements, different agendas, different priorities coming in, things can fall apart.
Most people wouldn't consider that fun. every once in a while, I say, like, hey, listeners, if you decide to use these, if anyone other than us has ever used these rules, let us know. I mean that probably more than ever. If anyone else tries to go through this undertaking and use Nathan's rules for designing your own mech, please tell us. I cannot believe anyone else would find this fun. But I could be proved wrong. Make Nathan's day. Tell us that you used it.
I've already had people say they're excited to use it, as well as people even to play strip heat management. So if people are willing to do strip heat management, our game mode modifier,
strip heat management is at least going to be a good time for someone.
This was such a good time for me, Michael. I had so much fun.
Everyone had a bad time, and the mech sucks.
Let's put it on the table. Anyhow, everyone, thank you for spending time with us today, walking through this process. It was really fun documenting this all and going through it all and creating a mess. And hopefully that was encapsulated by our conversation today. And to that person that we made cry with the flippy arms, our intern that had the HR rep involved, I will have a letter written to you by the end of the day, a formal apology for you. And I want you to know your contributions to this project have been invaluable.
Welcome back to the sphere we live in, Kodama Week. Stay tuned for all our exclusive programming. Up next, go on an expedition into horror with Kodama Adventures. After that, we'll look at the world that birthed these terrifying creatures with Isesaki, Land of the Kodama. Later, learn what it's like to live alongside the dread beasts in Living Under the Claw. Do you know what happens when a family of 20-kilogram marsupials meets a 1-ton armored predator from New Kyoto? Find out on Kodama vs. Armor Bear. Decades after the devastating attack, survivors are still trying to come to terms with the devastation. Hear their stories in Remembering Gina. And of course, don't miss the special Secrets of the Kodama. All this and more in Kodama Week, brought to you by the sphere we live in.
And that brings us to an end of another deployment of BungleTech. As always, you can find us via Discord, email, Twitter, and Patreon, all linked in the description. And to our current, past, and future Patreon supporters, you put the pulse in our lasers. Until next time, MechWarriors, good fortunes on the battlefield. Selah.
All podcast objectives complete. Podcast shutdown sequence initiated.